For those who are suffering through this with me, thank you. I do appreciate it. We are trying to get through with this just to get through. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Psh, sofa's back there. Psh, I'm right here. Psh, psh, psh. Boys are over there. They're kindly sleeping. Y'all, today we're continuing on with Visions of Glory, another installment of this. Again, if this is your first video here, you'll want to start at the beginning of the playlist. I'm doing a read-through of this. Why are we doing this? We're trying to figure out what the chokehold this book has on people like Lori, Chad, Julie wrote this crowd. Why am I still interested in it? Just because I am. Lori's getting ready to go up for another trial. This has been so prevalent, so I'm going through and just reading it out loud for everybody here, and then giving my commentary on each section at the end of it. And that's really it. So next section is called the library. A few seconds later, we stepped out into a room filled with people working at desks. Each desk had a large window before it with the same purpose as my room. They were studying the images and objects on the screen. Like my room, they could handle the objects, turn them, touch them, and experience them in, well, every possible way. Books that they desire to see did not need to be read. Just touching the book and handling it communicated the full burden of information to them. One touch was sufficient, but longer exposure was delightful as it allowed one to experience the book in greater depth, enjoying everything about it, including the life and events of the author's life. If they held it long enough, they could experience every person who had touched it and everything about them. I remembered my own experiences and knew that there was a point where the information was not uplifting and the object was returned to the screen. I believe these people were like myself, recently departed mortals who were now continuing their search for light and truth. They were dressed in flowing white robes. Their faces were glowing with happiness. There were people carrying objects through the room, taking them to the people seated at the desk. The people here were all engaged and busy but not hurried. There was a sense of eternity, but also a pleasant desire to learn as quickly as possible. They were all happy. This seemed to be a central library or information hub for people to learn. When they accomplished some level of learning, they received identical tokens of their education, just like those I had found in my chest. These were the objects the instructors were carrying through the room to present to their learners. As we walked through the room, there was a circle of light that preceded us. The people in each new place knew we were coming, who we were, and what our purpose and needs were. In fact, everything about us. The information about my guide was blocked from me, but not from others in the room. I was never allowed to know who my guide was, nor where he was from. Okay, now the next thing is God, Time, and Law. Now y'all better watch out. That might be a Morgan Wallen album. This is Morgan Wallen's new album title right here, okay? That's what we're talking about up in here. I don't know why I have a Band-Aid thing here, but anyways, let's keep going. So, God, Time, and Law. Okay, it was shown to me that God does not dwell in reality limited by time or distance. He exists outside of time and can move forward or backward through the construct of time. He created what we call time for our perception and progression, but he is not himself subject to it. Anywhere in his creation and any when in his creations, he is there. He can and does act in the past, present, and future. But to him, it is all now and here before his eyes. He can as easily speed up time for his purposes or stop it from progressing, all without our being aware of it. Since he can also see the end eternal outcome of all things and all people, he can influence or change anything, anywhere, and anytime. He desires to bless the eternal outcome of our lives. All of the things that we accept as mortal laws, like gravity, physics, light, heat, speed, are all creations of God. We are bound by them unto life or death, but he is not. They are laws. They belong to the telestial order. They function by his command and as he decrees, but he is not an inmate of the telestial order, and therefore he is not subject to these laws. When I first saw the Savior, he was standing above the earth, but was firmly anchored in his chosen place. These things do not violate the laws of nature, but operate above them in obedience to celestial laws. Father has ordained that time as perceived by mortals shall only go forward, but he himself is not subject to that etiquette. As I relate further in this book, as we grow close to the second coming, after we had labored to serve God for a long time and had acquired a greater measure of God's power as it operates in a millennial world, we began to have the ability to work without limitation by time or distance. It was the only way we actually finished the work assigned to us prior to his coming in glory. Okay, so now we're on returning to visit my body. And that's like me after every nap, right? Like, what happened? They're like, you were just out for 5 minutes. You dozed off at Dunkin' Donuts and a sugar coma. Yeah, that's the meme for this. Me revisiting my body after a 5-minute Dunkin' Donut sugar coma, right? I saw things, okay? I've seen the answers. Like, girl, you're snoozing at the counter with, a eclair dripping from your mouth. Okay, here we go. The next awareness I had was of being back in my bedroom at the foot of my bed. My body was still in the bed. I looked at the digital clock on my bedroom table. Exactly 1 hour had elapsed, though I had the sensation that we had been away for days and days. I knew that my body was dead according to the worldly measurement, but I was so thrilled with what I had just experienced that I wanted to wake my wife and tell her everything I just learned. Without verbal language, my guide told me that if I wanted to talk to my wife, I would need to go back into my body, and this experience would be completed. I realized there was more he wanted to show me, and that it was not time to return to my body, but for some reason we needed to visit it, perhaps to keep the link between my spirit and body strong while he took me on further journeys in the spirit. I told him, if you have more to show me, let us go. I'm ready. Chapter 6. Angels and Devils. Okay, Angels and Devils, Chapter 6. Okay, so evil spirits and temptation. Y'all, this literally is like on everything. I grew up in the South in North Carolina. You see this in those little things, the church things at the end of the driveway or whatever. What do they call it? Those signs? 100 times over a day, right? We didn't walk out the door. I just found myself in a different place. We were in a small home office. It was late at night. A young man in his underwear came into the room quietly, looking around stealthily as he entered. He closed the door softly without turning on the light. He went to a computer and turned it on. As he waited for the computer to warm up, I felt a growing sense of excitement coming from him. I knew that his wife and 2 sons and baby daughter were asleep elsewhere in the house and that he intended to view pornography. I understood this just by being in the room with him. As with previous experiences, I understood everything about him, his life, his decisions, his desires, his distress. I perceived that he was a good man, a returned missionary, and presently serving in his quorum presidency. My guide said to me, "Boy, this man here is here to view pornography." I saw 8 spirits enter the room. 4 of these were evil spirits who had once been mortal. The other 4 were unborn evil spirits. Satan's minions. Literally sounds like a rock band. The disembodied looked human and wore clothing typical of the period in which they had died. The evil spirits were less substantial, generally smaller, with misshapen features, making them look slightly inhuman. They were agitated, active, jumping around in a frenzy, shouting their commands to the young man in excited voices. The disembodied spirits said little at first. They had a little ability to be heard by the young man. They were there trying to satisfy the lustful passion, we'll call it, they had developed during their own lives. There were both male and female spirits. Their S addiction had followed them into the spirit world. Their addiction was unending, painful, and impossible to satisfy. It haunted them. They were desperate to try to satisfy it endlessly. They were pleased that they were going to shortly experience it through this young man. They were intent watching him, urging him on, though he could not hear them. They were not there looking at the corn on the computer screen. They were watching him closely, putting their faces in his face and screaming at him, mocking and taunting him. They didn't care about the images. They cared about sharing the body sensation of gratification. The unborn evil spirits were there to trap him, to entice him on, to remind him of the upcoming thrill. They cared nothing for experiencing his passion. They had never had a body and were not capable of understanding the thrill. They were there to control him, to make him obey their words, to keep him involved and under their spell as long as possible. They gathered around him and waited for him to become fully involved in his ecstasy he hoped for by viewing those images. The evil ones were reminding him of certain websites, urging him to go on, whispering to him how thrilling it was going to be. They told him which images to view and how he should feel about them. They argued against his conscience, giving him many reasons to ignore the voice of his conscience and carry on. They placed their hands on him time after time, causing him to feel thrill after thrill. They urged him as he clicked at his computer to seek after the thrill, to remember it, to need it more than anything else. They were most interested in keeping him focused upon his own body and his own thrill so effectively that he could not feel his relationship to Christ, the Holy Spirit, or remember his family. All he could think of was himself and the guaranteed gratification that was just a click away. The more excited he grew, the more frenzied the evil spirits became. They became more aggressive, jumping at him, hitting him with hands, and cursing. It was a loathsome thing to see. I realized even more powerfully from seeing this that all addictions are purely selfish. They guarantee the instant gratification of the flesh. Relationships are not guaranteed, and the gratification, the positive payback of the relationship must be carefully maintained and worked at. This is the reason that people turn to addictions, because they are instant, require little work, and the results are guaranteed. It is also the reason evil uses them and promotes them so carefully, because they push the user away from all meaningful relationships, especially those with the divine. I understood that he had been awakened from his sleep by one of these tempters, who had been influencing his dreams, urging him to awaken and need a S-high. As soon as he made the choice to get out of bed and actually partake, the disembodied spirits had joined in. They were drawn to him like a moth to a searchlight in a dark sky. They came at once. By accepting the temptation and deciding to do it, he had given them permission to enter him and experience his thrill with him. I saw many disembodied spirits competing to enter the small room with him. The evil spirits remained at just 4. When he made the decision to partake, all of his good intentions and desires were immediately drowned out by the passion and control of the evil spirits. The good spirits that had been near him as he slept were forced a distance away until he could not hear them. Eventually they left, driven away by his choices. When he reached a pinnacle of lust in his body, a black tear or rip appeared at the crown of his head. In that instant, the disembodied spirits began to attack. They looked like football players tackling the guy with the ball. They were hoping to share just a moment of his physical feelings and excitement. They acted like hungry dogs going after the same carcass. There was fierce competition among them to be in him longer. They fought to be next, screaming and cursing, throwing each other aside to enter. As soon as 1 or 2 spirits entered, no more could enter. The evil spirits screamed and dove at him repeatedly until a weaker one inside was expelled and they took its place. It seemed to me that the ones who were expelled were exhausted, jerking on the floor as if they were in a sexual thrill themselves, mimicking the actions of the young man at the computer. I tried to turn my face away in disgust, but I could not. The image was before me no matter which way I turned. The evil ones quickly recovered and rejoined the fight to re-enter over and over. The lust and addiction that these embodied spirits had built up in themselves while alive as mortals still haunted them. They couldn't get rid of the lust because they did not turn to Jesus Christ, who could have healed them even after their mortal lives ended. Without his grace, they couldn't justify the powerful need of the addiction. They couldn't escape it. Without any way to satisfy the addiction, it caused them pain, and they hunted across the globe for any opportunity to experience the thrill again, and thus lessen their pain even for a brief moment. My guide communicated to me that when these spirits entered their victim's body, they could not fully feel what he felt. It was filtered or buffered to them. It was only partly satisfying, and they could not remain long because of the competition. So they attacked again and again. The disembodied spirits were surrounded by darkness, and as they passed through this man, the darkness they possessed went into him. He could feel it as waves of dark longing, and it urged him to seek harder for more thrilling corn, harder and darker images, urging him from soft images to violent, even perverse and vile. He resisted at times, and they screamed at him, throwing themselves at him in a frenzy. When the young man had entered the room, I knew from the light that came with him that he was a good man. I could see the light that he possessed being dimmed as he sat there. I saw that there was far more glee in Satan's minions, that he was breaking his covenants, than that he was viewing pornography. Their glee was greater in the fact that he was a good man. If he was any off-the-street kind of guy who did this sort of thing without needing much temptation, their triumph was greater, their conquest was sweeter, and their control over him was more precious, due to the fact that this young man had made the covenants to avoid such things. They delighted in the pain that this would cause his wife and family, and they relished the opportunity to eventually affect his wife with all the dark emotions that she would feel that would separate her from the Holy Spirit. My last view of this guy was of him leaning close to the screen, breathing breathing heavily, while unseen by him, the four dark spirits screamed at him to continue, and another dozen disembodied souls threw themselves through him in a frenzy of unsatisfied lust. One of the most tragic aspects of the scene was that the spirits from the unseen world were offering him a sense of false relationship, giving him the sense of being fulfilled and satisfied by this experience. He was beginning to accept these unseen visitors as his companions, and he was starting to enjoy having them, welcoming their influence and helping him to decide to partake once again in his secret world of filth. Okay, that's going to be all we do for that right now. Okay, let's get into some of my final thoughts on all of this. Okay, so back to that very first part about the library. Number one, it was giving customer service nightmare, customer service eternity in hell, right? But also overall, is this part right here. Like, where it's talking about, like, you could pick a book up and you knew the information and, like, you could move it around, like Star Trek-y kind of stuff, whatever. Again, I just come back to this with, if you were, like, the fear of death and the unknown of that is so awful. Isn't this a better thing to think about? Like, right, to get you through to be like, once you die, like, this is what's waiting. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Star Trek customer service situation. You know what I'm talking about? Like, that's way more fascinating than we just die and don't do anything, right? Or, like, regardless of whatever your beliefs are, okay? This is interesting. Life and people are pretty simplistic on many levels, right? I'm not trying to take away from the magic of life or anything like that, or the nuances of the human experience. But in general, something like this is way more fascinating than the way a real library works. Okay, like, it just is. Like, this sounds fun to me. Like, yeah, let's go hang out at the library every day, okay? So that seems to be so present in the books here where I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is way more interesting. Like, life can be kind of boring. Life can be kind of mundane. This sounds fascinating. Now, on that section about God, time, and law. Now, here's the thing, and this concept is, like, not new to me. And I'm not trying to like, oh yeah, I know this. Like, when I was hanging out with God, like, we totally covered this. I'm not trying to sound like that. But the idea of, like, this idea that time is happening all at one time spreads across many different religious beliefs and spirituality and things like this, right? So I have sat here at one time and been like this, like, so right now, there could be, like, and let's just reduce it down to something simple, like the Western time. That could be happening on another plane right now. That, to me, is incredibly fascinating. And again, I come back to this. Isn't that way more interesting than to just think of, like, what we know is time just here? Like, what we know is what we know, right? That part is way more fascinating and intriguing. Now, also in that whole thing of it being more interesting, more fascinating, whatever, when you start talking about extracting us and what we know as the human experience and the laws of this earth and gravity and this and that, whatever, time and all this type of stuff, and you start talking about, like, you know, this existing here and this is going on and this and that and blah 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 blah, and the here and now is not that and this and that and the other. Again, way more interesting to me, way more fascinating, and I get that. I can see the dynamic of wanting to get lost in this, and also that level of whether you have a specific religion or you're just spiritual or you're not at all, whatever. You know, and I'm relating my own experience to when I get so stressed out, I don't know what to do and I just want to turn that over. And so if that turning it over, whatever that means for you, right? So that means to God, to Buddha, to Allah, whatever it is for you, okay? Or to meditation, like whatever, literally. That is very freeing. It's very, you know. And so specifically to relate back to this, and like with Lori and Chad, people like that, you know, where you're sitting here and like we see where they were kind of going with this. Although I think with like Lori and Chad, they specifically started looking at themselves as the saviors and whatnot. They wanted to be the person that people turned it over to, if that makes sense. Yeah, but there's something very freeing in that, to be like, I can't handle this, I'm gonna turn it over. You can see the pipeline is what I'm getting at, right? And then for someone like Lori and Chad, and I'll say this in every one of these videos that I make, for someone that clearly kind of has like some issues going on like Lori and Chad did, I see the intoxicating aspect of this, where to me it's normal for someone to say, I'm turning this stress, this whatever, over to my higher power, whatever that is, okay? There's a difference when you're like, I'm gonna now become the higher power here on earth that people turn their stuff over to. Like, that's where I'm like, are we sure about that? We really need to make a phone call to somebody. You know what I mean? So anyways, so now when it comes down to that last part that we went over about the corn and the guy coming in the room and all that type of stuff, like, again, major creative here, right? I mean, this is just like a scene from a horror film, you know, and again, without like, you know, trying to get into any kind of specific like religion's beliefs on that type behavior and whatnot. Looking at this, there's two things that came to my mind reading this. Number one, it's a very fearful thing. So if you're young and hearing this kind of stuff of like, if you do this, this is what happens. I mean, you know, there's that. Now I know a lot of religions don't want, you know, the lustfulness, the this, that, and that's, I get it. Okay. Very scary imagery there that this guy is talking about. What spoke to me even more, again, because I'm really just looking at this through the lens of like Chad and Lori. Okay. So remember the book that Chad wrote to Lori, The Loins of Fire? Whatever it's called, okay? And this just reiterates it even more. The naughtiness that is taught through not just this, you know, this specific stuff, but like all religions, like the naughtiness that surrounds human intimacy, let's say, right? Like without getting too descriptive there, makes it naughty, makes it forbidden, makes it the unknown, the touch the fire, the flames, all that. So looking back at Chad and Lori, where he's like, you know, the things that he's like repeating, where it was almost like it seemed to fetishize certain aspects of the Mormon religion in his thing. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like in that little thing. If you haven't read it, then you're going to want to go back and read it. I mean, it's short. It's like basically a text message, right? Elena, I think was what he called Lori in it. So it's almost like where I can see him like, oh yeah, this is just like, yeah, this was naughty to Chad. This was naughty to Lori. This was titillating. This was a turn on. This was all those things, right? So I can see that more now on reading something like that. And again, look at it from like creative writing fiction 101, okay? Like, again, this guy's presenting this as real, right? But let's just look at it from that. It's an interesting story. It's a fable. It's teaching you something. Whether you align with the beliefs or not is irrelevant, right? Let's just look at it from a storytelling perspective, right? That was, I mean, would I want to read that myself? No. But it was interesting, at least in comparison to other parts of the book, right? And so it's like, okay, if your MO is to teach people like, hey, it is not good to touch yourself. It is not good to go after these lustful images on the computer. Because there's some truth in that. It's a very emptying feeling, right? I mean, if you've like studied this or looked into things like this or whatever, experienced it yourself, you know, I get where they're coming from. It's a little dramatic, but you know, whatever. Now, again, I'm not even going down the pipeline of this dude's like, you know, talking about like this legit happened, right? To each their own on that. Like, you know, you believe that or whatever. But again, just rounding it back out to Lori and Chad, I just come back to that where I'm like, I see how those two specifically went down this. I see how it played out in their fantasy making. Because so much of what like Chad and Lori were talking about when the evidence came forth from the Zulema and like all these people, you're just like, huh? Like this is like so over the top, right? And I've heard from so many people who like, let's say that might be, I'm going to say regular Mormons, okay? And when I say that, like I'm just, you already know, like we've either talked or like, you know, think Nate Eaton, like regular, everyday, nice people that you talk to in the grocery line that happen to be, that's their religion, right? LDS, Mormon, I'm not sure what the proper name is, whatever. No different than it's like, oh, there's Claire who works at the store. She's Baptist. There's so-and-so that works over here. They're this, like that type thing without these like over the top Lori and Chad exaggerations. And, you know, I see how Lori and Chad were like, it's like they were making their own Bible, making their own visions of glory, trying to at least at the expense of innocent lives. That's the part that like is so left field, the carnage that they left in their wake, right? Even if you took all that out and it was like, oh yeah, here's this group of people that are doing these castings and zombie stuff and this Dungeons and Dragons kind of like role-playing stuff, it's like, okay, that's over the top. But if nobody's getting hurt and they're all consenting human beings in this, honey, if that's what you want to do on your weekend, go for it, right? Like, what am I to say? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I don't care. You know what I mean? To each their own. You know, again, you stay on your porch with your BS, I'll stay on my porch with my BS. Never the two shall meet. And if no one's getting hurt and everybody's cool, then we're all good, boo. You know? But obviously that wasn't the case in this case, right? There's a lot of tragedy that surrounds it. So that's the installment of Visions and Glory today. We will keep going down this rabbit hole. We are trying to get through with this just to get through and to get to that book that the Murder Nerd, if you haven't followed her channel, the Murder Nerd, look it up. She's amazing. She sent me another Chad Daybell book that he autographed, and we're going to do that next after this. So be on the lookout for it. So we'll get through this, and that's it. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I do appreciate it. And if you come while you're in that comment section, guess what? Drop some sofas off. Not just for me, but for Rosco and Spirit, the boys who are sleeping kindly. So we'll have a place to hang out and talk about this case and all the other ones we do talk about here at the Sofa Squad. And until we do all that, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.